I'm Kathy Maclean, a farmer's wife. I live in the village of St Mary Hu, which has to be one of the smallest and the cutest on the Hu Peninsula. I love writing and have currently had 2 books published. One was about my childhood in New Zealand and quite a lot of history about that lovely country. And the second, called A Kiwi in Kent, relates to farming over the decades and also illustrates and describes the characters that I've randomly chosen from the Hu Peninsula. It's now my pleasure to read you a story about a very important farmer by the name of Henry Pye, who lived in the village of St Mary Hu in the middle of the 19th century until he died in 1909. It's impossible to read a book on the history of the Hu Peninsula without frequent mentions of Henry Pye. He was, in fact, its saviour, turning it from a soggy place of unwholesome air, best avoided, into a place of fertile opportunity. Henry was born in Court Lodge, a fine farmhouse in Cuxton, where his well-to-do parents raised 11 children. They were one of the best-known farming families in the county. His mother, descended from Henry Hudson, the explorer and navigator, instilled a pioneering spirit in her children and also the will to branch out on their own. From his eminent parents, Henry inherited an attitude to succeed, a zest for life, work and sport. He arrived in St Mary Hu in 1850 as a tenant of the Dean and Chapter of Rochester Cathedral. Many were to question his choice, for at the time the Hundred of Hu, a large portion of the peninsula, was an unkempt area. The roads were disgraceful, there was rampant malaria, and the huge acreages of marshes were undrained. Agriculture was at a low ebb. The land was heavy and yielded little. But Henry, young, opinionated and confident, was also a passionate farmer. He quickly made the advances which had previously not been attempted, and soon he was setting an example to his neighbours and farmers further afield. Many acres of the peninsula farmland subsequently became the property of the church, managed by the Church Commissioners of England. Henry became their tenant on 11 local farms, which went by the names, and still do, of St Mary's Hall Farm, Moat Farm, Swiggs Hole, Ross Farm, Hopper's Farm, Turkey Hall Farm, Newbarn Farm, and Melmain's Farm. He owned only one, which was Clinch Street. All the farms were adjoining, so that his land stretched from High Howstow to Grain. Shortly after settling into St Mary's Hall, he married Elizabeth Guy. They had 6 children. Tragically, their first child, a son, Henry, died after a week, and their second, a daughter, Elizabeth, at just 9 months. Their deaths were followed by the births of another Henry and daughters Emmeline, Marianne, and Edith. Henry Jr. and 2 daughters remained local to the area and never married. Emmeline, who settled in Hu St Werburg and later in Charnel Street, died at 95, apparently looking, though it sounds rather unkind, like Miss Havisham. Henry Pye is particularly remembered for his innovative ideas. The venerable man whose house, St Mary's Hall, eventually became our house, was appalled with the incidence of infantile deaths. Having lost 2 precious babies, he set about attempting to lessen the fear and foreboding of life hereabouts at the time. The North Kent marshes then were bleak and inhospitable, with stagnant water caused by the blocked ditches providing a perfect breeding ground for the Anopheles mosquito. The lack of draining over decades had created heavy, unyielding grazing ground. Henry could see the potential. He understood the source of the problem and was keen to rectify it. Others had not been prepared to invest time and effort, nor, of course, did they have the means to do so. Henry, though still a young man, had the backing of an extended and wealthy Kent family. Tiny graves were commonplace in the churchyards. This evidence spurred Henry into action. He filled a cupboard in the hall with quinine, which immediately helped to save the lives of the residing children of the village and beyond. He instructed his workers to dig ditches. These were then lined with plentiful cockle shells from St. Mary's Bay. This simple draining method proved so effective it was used on all local farms adjoining the river. He also sprayed ditches, creeks and saltings to stop the spread of the marsh ague. Generous by nature with his time and advice, always eager to help, and a natural mediator in any dispute, under Henry's guidance, the Hundred of Who gradually became a healthier, happier place. With its potential discovered, it began producing, and his own acres at last became fertile for the varied crops he chose to grow and also for the livestock he grazed near the Thames. Henry is most famously remembered for his farming techniques, which were revolutionary. Working tirelessly, he became one of the most respected and forward-thinking farmers in the country. He applied chalk to the land, while his method of ploughing provided a template for others to follow. He was the first farmer in the land to use his friend Thomas Aveling's steam plough, and was very happy to promote its revolutionary qualities. It was Aveling, the designer of the steamroller and traction engine, who was responsible more than anyone else for improved surfaces on roads, not only on the peninsula, but eventually almost everywhere else in the world. Henry bought 3 of Thomas's steam engines, 3 steam ploughs and threshers, all of which were in great demand in the district. As a result, wheat production on a large scale proved successful. All the while, he was happy to help other farmers inside the 100 by offering his time or his machines. Not surprisingly, as a nod to his importance, Henry Pye was known as the King of the 100. He was reputed to be kind and fair to his workers, and there would have been a large number of them. They were as well paid as any in the clear divisions between the rich and the poor of the time. Henry found time to host the hunt over his farms, and he rode his thoroughbreds whenever possible. He played cricket and enjoyed watching local teams. He chaired many local committees and was on the boards of others. He was also a justice of the peace. The family holidayed extravagantly with many adventures in this country and abroad. But for the most part, he loved being at the helm of his farms and was an icon, a pillar of the community, a church warden and a devout Christian. Henry grew hops at Turkey Hall, early potatoes for the London market, and fruit on other farms. He soon set about establishing seed growing as an industry, particularly radish, pea and wurzel, which formed the backbone of the peninsula's farm economy at the time. And he grazed sheep, cows and bullocks on his newly drained marshes. Because he was so progressive, and knowing there was now a seam of rich, fertile land on the peninsula, he encouraged others in the production of potatoes, hops, fruit, and agriculture. He was instrumental in persuading the powers that be of the need for a railway link from Hoo Junction to Charnel Street to transport the harvests of these plantings to the ready markets of London and the larger towns in Kent. Henry was eventually successful in this venture, and Charnel Street Station was opened to a busy trade in 1882. Thanks to this new rail system, which also included a single line track to Grain, produce from the hundred of Hoo was shortly being enjoyed in major cities. The royal family chose to use the station at Grain, which became known as Port Victoria. Queen Victoria particularly enjoyed leaving from the newly opened port when she visited her daughters in Germany. From a place of foul air and stagnant water, from its unhealthy residents and the dread of the Anopheles mosquito, the peninsula began to transform. While Elizabeth I might well have walked our village street, the Chancellor too, and Hawes, highwaymen, and other colourful characters, it is this man, Henry Pye, for whom I feel empathy. The marshes he part-drained with shells from the beach. We've both ridden over, he and I, every inch of them. Remarkably, he lived in St Mary's Hall for 60 years. I was there for a mere 47. Henry passed away in 1909, and his death is marked with a headstone in St Nicholas's Cemetery, Rochester. His children are buried in the churchyard in St Mary Hoo. Emmeline Pye played the organ in St Mary's Church each Sunday until she left the village in 1921, while Henry Jr. attended every service in all weathers. The 11 Pye siblings of Henry Sr. have ensured the legacy of the name lives on. There are a huge number of descendants scattered worldwide, though many are based in Kent. Soon after Henry's death, a diligent editor asked for family contributions towards a Ye Family Pye diary. This resulted in at least 3 heavy bound volumes with illustrations. They cleverly contain valuable information of births, deaths, and marriages over a period during World War I until way after the war ended. There are also descriptive letters from family members describing adventurous holidays and other news, local farming, and anything worthy of interest. Sometimes, not surprisingly, mention of brave family members losing their lives in combat were also chronicled. These precious, expertly edited diaries are stored in the Medway archives. This was an extended family which was as enterprising as it was wealthy. After Henry's death in 1909, his children remained for a decade until the tenancy passed into the hands of the Maclean family, one I became part of much later when I journeyed from New Zealand to be married. The stations mentioned, Charnel Street and Port Victoria at Grain, closed due to dwindling customer numbers, and in the case of Port Victoria, structural decay. Charnel Street remained open until 1961. A station was opened at All Hallows in 1932, as it was thought to be a potential delightful answer to those who wanted a seaside resort close to London. A return ticket from Charing Cross cost 5 shillings and 6pence. It was initially popular, a pub was built, and a fun fair established. There was also a promise of a huge number of houses in a proposed new community. That never materialised at the time. Numbers dwindled after the war, and the station was closed in 1961. The attraction of Brighton was just too great.